Excellent. So welcome everybody. It's great to be spending a little bit of time with you today in the morning if you're on the West Coast, or in the afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Here at Alma Base, we wanted to have an event that looked at things from a kind of higher level. And when we were thinking of people to bring to share knowledge with you, Nathan Chappell immediately came to mind as a foremost expert. Our CEO, Kalyan, is going to say a few words, then Nathan is going to present. And after that, we're hoping that you will be willing to partake in a conversation. Just, are you seeing all of this that you just heard about in your own shops, in your own practices? So without further ado, Kalyan Varma, CEO of Alma Base, welcome.
Thank you, Louis. I mean, it's great to be here with so many advancement professionals. Welcome again, everyone. Good to see some familiar names and faces. So, at Alma Base, our mission has always been, how do we make education more affordable to everyone by driving more alumni donations? And I fundamentally believe that alumni philanthropy is critical to the future of how we fund education for students. And more broadly speaking, we think frequently about the mega trends that impact philanthropy. And this obviously helps us develop cutting edge products that solve problems you have right now, but also ensure your future growth, right? So in that context, I'm really honored to welcome an expert in philanthropy today, Nathan Chappell. He'll introduce himself in a moment, but I just wanted to say that I really admire how he's taken his perspective as a practicing fundraiser to his current work in AI. And, as an analyst of this issue that he calls the generosity crisis. So I'll hand it over to Nathan now. He'll do his presentation, which will walk through some of the details. And after that, we'll definitely have a chance to discuss how, any of you are seeing some of the same things in your day-to-day fundraising and engagement experience. So we'll first hand it over to Nathan now. Nathan, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and some familiar faces and new faces. And excited to have this as a participatory kind of session. So I only planned about 15, 20 minutes max to go over kind of the premise of the generosity crisis, to level set a little bit, but then hope that it sparks some interest in some robust conversations, as I know all of you are facing different elements of this, as I have throughout my career. And so I'll just jump in. Real quick thumbs up, just a Zoom check that you can see my screen before I ramble some. Okay, awesome. Pre-pandemic, I would have not done that. So we've learned a little bit. So I for those that don't know me, I'm Nathan Chappell. I've spent 20 years fundraising. Actually started out very small, grassroots Boys and Girls Club, moved my way up. I found myself as Associate Vice Chancellor at UC San Diego, where I led advancement operations in the $2 billion campaign, which just completed a $3 billion. So left UC San Diego, and actually UC San Diego is where I started a lot of my work in analytics, of trying to take all the data that we had in from various forms and fashions, and was using that data to really try to predict whether or not we were going to hit goals. So it was more internal centric versus what I do now, which is more external. I moved from UC San Diego and went to City of Hope, which is a fairly large independent cancer center, where essentially we were faced with the same challenge, this challenge of raising more money from less people every year. Never had a year in 20 years where my fundraising goal decreased. And also, while those goals increased, also had challenges of retention and keeping people engaged, and really suffered from a lot of what you suffer from, which is very low renewal rate for the most part. So yeah, I come at this as really as a fundraiser and a fundraising leader. Kind of migrated about 5 years ago after using machine learning for a number of years, and filed the first patents on gratitude prediction and machine learning. Started talking about the intersection of AI and philanthropy, and it's kind of easy to be like a leader in a subsection that's so narrow that nobody else wants to do it. So it's kind of like, if you want to own a niche, just pick something super obscure and just learn everything about it. but it has been an incredible ride. And for me, my work in AI, which we won't talk about too much, we can talk about later if you want, but is my work in big data and technology was really a means to an end. It was really never something I intended to do. It was something that was almost forced to do 5 years ago when we had this grand challenge from our CEO, just, that we needed to raise 25% more money, but we couldn't hire more people. And so truly the definition of working smarter, not harder. What I'll talk about today is really the culmination of all that work and what we've learned about connection, and how we know, more about connection now and how that drives philanthropy than really anything else. So I'll just dive in, and the title was called The Generosity Crisis because I just wrote a book that came out on National Philanthropy Day called The Generosity Crisis. I actually don't consider myself an author, which is why I had 2 co-authors join me. I never had this as a bucket list thing to do. In fact, I tried to, for a period of years, tried to convince several other people to write a book on the generosity crisis. To give you a little historical context, in 2012, I worked for CCS, a large nonprofit consulting firm, and I was asked to write about something that wasn't written about a lot. And so each consultant had kind of this grand challenge once a year to come up with a topic that was interesting to them, but wasn't widely known. And in 2012, it was 2 years after the Giving Pledge was signed. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett came out with the Giving Pledge, and it seemed to have a lot of excitement. And I'll actually get off that screen because it's annoying. And that was my publicist who did that. So I think for the intention of being annoying. So going back, 2010 Giving Pledge was signed. 2012, I wrote did a study called The Evolution of Mega Gifts. And it had 2 kind of philosophies. I didn't really have a hypothesis, but the 2 different ways that Giving Pledge could go. One would be for the first time since Carnegie and Rockefeller really were talking publicly in social circles about mega gifts. Since that was the first time that philanthropy had gained that much attention, and it was really exciting. And so that could either inspire a lot more giving and more people would follow because they'd be excited and follow their lead, or conversely, it could detract and essentially create what we call the crowding out effect. And the crowding out effect is essentially, Bill Gates is on the scene, Warren Buffett's on the scene, my gifts are no longer as valued and needed. And I'm sure you've all seen different forms and fashions. So of course, over the last, from that time in 2012 to really 10 years past, I was just completely infatuated with reading detail and data from Giving USA, and not just the Giving USA report, but I was the nerd who would get the report. I would block off my calendar for the full day, and I'd read the footnotes and I'd read the appendix. And I would really, what I was really interested in was, if all things were good philanthropy, which is what most consultants would believe, and they were high-fiving each other when philanthropy hit an all-time high every year, and philanthropy is super resilient and 2.1% of GDP and all those things that for years we've reinforced this narrative that all things were great on the Western Front. And I'd be this lone person to say, wait, it's not. The mix of who's making up those gifts is it's very different. So year over year over year, obviously, as you have to go through the footnotes because it's not called out in detail in the report itself, to find out that more and more of generosity and philanthropy in America is being given by ultra high net worth individuals. Therefore, you have to conclude that fewer other Americans, non-high net worth individuals, so fewer of me were making charitable gifts. And this was not very popular to talk about. I didn't make a lot of friends talking about this for quite a while. And then the Generosity Commission came out with this statement in their kind of preamble for their study that they wanted to launch, which is a future generosity in America is not guaranteed. And it created a safe space to talk about this idea that, wait, maybe not everything is okay. And maybe we need to investigate what's going on a little bit more. And so Generosity Commission was created, if you're not familiar with it, as a very short-term study and analysis of generosity in America. It's concluding this year. And so the final results of their studies, they've been funding studies at UPenn and other places on really what's going on and how generosity is changing in different ways. but something that you want to keep an eye out for. But it did create a more comfortable space to talk about this. And really, when I was starting to look through the data with Giving USA, the numbers are pretty startling when we again take out those ultra high net worth individuals and their gifts. If you're looking at an average gift size, which is what we have, an average gift size with our $6 billion that we process every day, $131. If you take out those ultra high net worth gifts and you're looking at just the remaining amount of money, that equates just last year on the 2021 report, 34.8 fewer gifts. So there's something that's going on in our country that is actually fairly profound and again being masked. And many of you have seen a version of this chart, but this is the percentage of households that give. And again, if you lay this this trajectory, any for-profit business, any for-profit sector, any for-profit anything, there would be, all the tech companies are laying off tons of people right now because they have a trajectory that doesn't look good in the future. Any trajectory that looks like this doesn't end well. And really what came to us is when we drew a straight line, we just modeled it out straight line, we found that giving ends to charitable organizations in 49 years. And that was like this, oh my gosh, moment. It should make you sweaty. Giving as we know it in the US to nonprofit organizations, not to say people might be giving more in other ways, GoFundMe's and things like that, but to charitable organizations and the 10 million people that work for those 10 million, those nonprofit organizations face a different future, and not a future that I want for my kids or for grandkids, not a future that we want for our communities. And again, not a popular thing to talk about. And then I met Drew Lindsay from the Chronicle of Philanthropy back when I presented on this topic at AFP Icon last year. And it was ironic because there's 1,000 people at the conference and only 45 people showed up to my session. Drew Lindsay came up and he's like, why isn't everyone talking about this? Why isn't everyone aware? And one is in Las Vegas and nobody wants to hear bad news in Las Vegas, but two, it's not a comfortable topic. It's not, it's not empowering in the sense, unless we kind of move past the problem to solution. So he wrote this cover story in the Chronicle in July. If you haven't read it, you should go back and read it. There's some incredible stories in it about organizations that are kind of beating the odds, and they're doing it by embracing their communities in different ways. And so again, creating a safer space for us to talk about this. Overall, one of the arguments that we've received is that, the Giving USA data is not complete. It's an isolated group of people that they've been studying. But we know that there's been a 16% decrease in the households that participate. So we started looking at other factors, and just to validate this assumption. And we look at Gallup. Gallup is a much more inclusive way of surveying philanthropy. They go out in surveys, electronic surveys, or grocery stores and say, do you give to charity? And even with Gallup, which is a much more inclusive, much more broad way of assessing whether people give, even with Gallup, there's a 13% decline. And this decline is kind of across the board in all different areas. So again, there's something here we need to pay attention. The issue with our sector, and I was probably a culprit of this at UC San Diego, is that we then just kind of bought the premise that less people are going to give. So we put all of our eggs in fewer baskets. So essentially, there has been a pretty wide divide in equity in America. And so we were all just focusing the lens on ultra high net worth people. And what that's done is created a tremendous competition for a very few number of donors, but also, you've got a lot of eggs in a few baskets versus bringing up individuals differently. For this session, I was asked to talk a little bit about, so I'll only go through a couple of slides on this. It's not my normal thing, but the impact of uncertain economic times. So call them whatever you want: inflation, recession, uncertain economic times, and the impact to this. So the direct impact, as we look at the number of people that have signed the giving pledge over the years, it's been fairly stable. It's been, so we're putting a lot of eggs in this basket. It's been kind of working okay for some and not for some others. But something happened last year in 2021, which, as we know, ultra high net worth, in 2022, what we know is ultra high net worth individuals have a much clearer lens of the future because they have lots of advisors and lots of strategists that help guide them on where they're going to invest next year and the year after that and after that. We saw a tremendous drop off in the number of people who signed the Giving Pledge in 2022. Half, less than half. The year before was 14. You can see it's been fairly stable between 12 and 16 to 18 to 12. So as we put all these eggs in this few baskets, it's very fickle because all of a sudden you face some economic uncertainty, and all of a sudden those donors are going to say, wait, hold on. In 2008, 2009, when we went through kind of the big disrupt and up through 2011, I was working with someone who was worth $3 billion. Actually, I think before he was worth $4 billion, his wealth went down to like $1.5 billion. It was highly invested in real estate. And he started riding his bike to work because to save money, like to be clear, to save money, this billionaire, still worth over $1 billion, felt as if he was starting over. And so that fear, so, 1 billion to 6 billion doesn't really matter. It's a mentality of like, I need to grow and I need to leverage my assets to move forward, and just wait for me on the other side. I'll be fine, but I'm going to double down right now in these uncertain times in inflationary periods and kind of, just hunker down. I think probably a lot of you have seen different parallels of that, but I mean, firsthand. So really, obviously, the economy is correlated to charitable giving, but it is fairly resilient. So giving has been fairly stable all the way up through in 2008. You see kind of that first kind of steep decline, but even after that, we've had tremendous increases. Giving is fairly resilient, and it remains around 2.1% of GDP. But there are different tactics that some organizations fare better than others in uncertain economic times, and there are some lessons to be learned there. And of course, one of the indicators I always liked looking at was the percentage of giving to GDP, the gross domestic product. And as you can see, I mean, in 40 years, 2.1%, pretty much just fluctuating up or down. Again, this year might be a little bit interesting. I think we're going to see some my prediction is some troubling data coming out of Giving USA this year, as we assessed last year, because the boost that we were hoping for out of COVID wasn't as promising as we had wanted. But in the end, what this all necessitates is you to, change your approach. In my 20 years of fundraising, I've learned that the enemy of fundraising is really not the economic climate as much as it is uncertainty. And uncertainty, and I've seen this with gift officers, I've seen this with leaders wanting to either stop, play it safe. They introduce lots of their own biases around why they can't, move forward either with a campaign or with fundraising strategy, versus, really being more objective and checking your biases on, what's actually happening. And there's a short list here. Since I work for CCS, I actually took this out of the CCS playbook. And these slides can be available to anyone, but there's a great report I can send you the link to of practical things that you can do to overcome economic uncertainty, like address it, have conversations, because we add a lot of biases about what's going on versus not. To emphasize impact. I mean, of course, we all know that it's around, going and looking differently at blended asks versus just, and deferred gifts versus just straight cash gifts and things like that. But there's some really great resources. I will say, for the most part, a lot of organizations fare well. If they focus on the right things and they say, keep their eyes on the prize and they stay focused and kind of keep going, they're gonna do okay. Better than some would have done through the pandemic, in the sense of like the arts or the places got shut down during economic uncertain times or inflationary periods. It really is more about fulfilling the promise to donors that you made to them in the first place. And that really gets us to the second half of our book, which is the bright side. The bright side is essentially that uncertain economic times, like inflationary periods or recessions, require us to do what we promised to do from the very beginning. Nonprofits talk about partnership, and they talk about bringing people together through thick and thin. This is your time to prove that promise. It's that time that you are going to say, we didn't just, those weren't just words. We're with you. We're going to be with you. Every time that's happened in my career, and every time I've seen it with clients that we've worked with, they come out better in the end, because those people really felt, okay, you meant what you said. We're with you, and you valued my relationship with you to the point that you calibrated your expectations with what my financial means were. And so the bright side is that this is an opportunity for organizations to really double down on that connection. And this is my own kind of personal manifesto, but really, I mean, this is the new way of philanthropy, is a belief that generosity is not about money, which is easy to say, but it's really the manifestation of connection. And Alma Base, I was just sharing before we got on the call, believes this so much. Like, it's so much about how engagement and connection drive revenue, relationships drive revenue, not the other way around. I think for a lot of my career, it would be like, let's find wealthy people and let's convince them to give, in gross terms. Those are, kind of broad, bad ways of thinking. But I worked in healthcare philanthropy a lot, wealth screening 1 million patients and only presenting to doctors the patients that have wealth is not a sustainable practice. And we've done a lot of the same thing in higher education, is wealth screen people that, deserve more attention, versus let's look at those that are connected, in a deep way, and let's, foster that connection over time. I did a study when I was at UC San Diego, and I'll kind of conclude on this part because I want to get to some Q&A as well. But I had done a study when I was there on the length of time that if I took the top 25 gifts in any particular year, so whatever year I was doing the study, I'd look at the top 25 gifts that we received in the university that year. And I looked at the average amount of time that those people had from when they made their first gift. And it was amazing. It was 18 and a half years that people, since they made their largest gift to the university, 18 and a half years. But during that time, they had something like 26 gift officers. The relationship stood the test of time. The gift officer is a steward of the relationship for a small period of time. It needs to be aligned in that way, because your best donors tomorrow are not the ones that you're seeming to look at today. Those are the ones that we fostered relationships with over time, and they continue to understand and be part of the mission. And again, preaching to the choir here, but it just is it's an important tale to tell, in that connection drives revenue, not the other way around. And what we've learned, fast forward to where we are today, I've focused in machine learning, deep learning for the last 5 years, where we can quantify connection. Essentially, the value of your database. Too often in my career, I've heard professionals say the value of my database is if the sum of all the wealth of the wealthy people. And our database is worth billions of dollars, because if everyone in our database gave, the world is bright, and the world is our oyster. The reality, the value of your database is worthless if you can't quantify the connection, if you can't isolate and identify the people that actually care about you in a way through online or offline means, and then use wealth as essentially a secondary filter. Wealth is essentially the backside of the coin. The first side of the coin is someone going to give because they're connected to you? The backside of the coin is how much, which is related to their wealth. By separating out those two sides of the coin, I think we have a much clearer view of the motivations of giving, of those people that are leaning in to our cause, or those that are not, which is okay. But I don't think the future of fundraising is around more is more, or more is better. The future of fundraising is, philanthropy becomes local, it becomes personal, it becomes, this idea that I know you and you know me. And 2/3 of our book, The Generosity Crisis, is written around this idea of radical connection, because people are inundated with ways of connecting to organizations. Radical connection is really this idea that I'm not a just passive participant of a mission or relationship, but I'm an active participant. It's something that you go out of your way for, versus something that you just passively consume. And so that's really a majority of the generosity crisis. And while we don't prescribe all of the ways to reverse the crisis, we do believe that the pendulum has swung so far on the transactional over the last 20 years that organizations have essentially looked at donors as ATMs far too often, and that has resulted in this negative trend. But really, by doubling down on this idea of fostering authentic connection and being able to quantify that connection is really how a big nonprofit becomes small, and how it becomes local, and how it becomes personal to an individual. There are some resources. Feel free to download off our website. You can go to generositycrisis.com. There's some free resources like a book club field guide. There's like kind of a poster, 10 ways to foster radical connection. And there's also conversation starters that could be used as icebreakers, either with your teams or with donors, on just talking about generosity, because it really starts with just talking about generosity. And don't worry, it will ask you to put the book order number in there when you download these. You can just make up a number. It's all something that they did. It's kind of dumb, but you can just put XYZ, download these resources, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions. So that's the end of mine. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know I probably dumped, like, that was like fire hose, everything from, the world's imploding to there's hope, but happy to stay on and have a conversation.